What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the gear you're going to need to run two-handed stam DPS builds. So this is another gear oriented video. We'll be going over gear, anything in the character sheet that is common among all 6 of the classes in ESO. So we will not be going over things like skills, we won't be going over any sort of class specific stuff like rotations and things like that. Those are going to be reserved for the class-specific videos. The only exception to this is going to be the Sorcerer, because your standard Stamina Sorcerer should be using the two-handed already, so there won't be a unique two-handed build for the Stamina Sorc, because the Stamina Sorc build that I already have out, Typhoon, that one already uses the two-handed build here. So the other build videos for each class can be found in the description below as they're released throughout the week. So again, two-handed gear build here. So in terms of gear and where two-handers kind of stand in the overall stamina DPS realm, two-handers have seen a lot of use in PvE, endgame PvE, not necessarily because they have greater single target DPS potential compared to dual wield, but because they have much greater splash potential or AoE potential compared to dual wield builds. In addition, two-handers do have access to a shield, which makes them a little bit more survivable. So for Trinity achievements, for groups that are more focused on survivability, two-hander builds might actually be a little bit more beneficial because they have access to an ability that does grant them a shield. And we will talk about that a little bit in this video, just because it is something that is not necessarily going to be in every single build for each class, but it is something I want to talk about a little bit here as to the advantages and disadvantages of running a two-handed build. But first, let's go ahead and talk about gear. In terms of the set you're going to be running as a two-handed stamina DPS, most of it is going to be exactly the same as you would expect to see on a dual-wield build. Obviously, the main difference is you're not running two weapons, you're running a single two-handed weapon instead. So, for example here, we're still running either Velidreth, Maarselok, or Selene. Those are your 3 best Martial Helm sets. However, there is an argument to be made for running one-piece Krog and one-piece Velidreth for the additional weapon damage bonus. And that's because this ties back to the difference in weapons. Two-handed builds means you're only using one weapon. A dual-wield build means you are running 2 weapons. Basically what that means is dual-wield builds, you have the opportunity to have 2 traits. That being said, the traits are only at half strength, but that does give you a little bit of additional build flexibility because you're able to use one sharpened along with one nern-honed weapon as a dual-wield build. As a two-handed build, you only have access to one weapon and therefore only one trait. So if you want to use something like Precise or nern-hone, you need to make up the penetration somewhere, because you always want to be able to get that penetration cap of 18,200. Even putting a full 100 points into piercing, you won't be able to meet that cap. So one of the kind of decisions you have to make as a two-handed build is, am I going to run Sharpened as my weapon trait, or am I going to run a armor set that has one-piece physical penetration bonus? That way I can still meet the penetration cap without using Sharpened on my weapon. That's not to say that Sharpened is a bad choice for a weapon slot, but it is one of those decisions that you do have to make here as a two-handed build. In terms of the other sets though, again, pretty much what you would expect to see from a dual-wield build. So in this example, we have Perfected Relequen from Cloudrest, and then we also have Lokkestiiz from Sunspire. So both of these do require different chapters. So Relequen comes from Cloudrest, which requires the Somerset chapter, and then Lokkestiiz comes from Sunspire, so you need to have access to the Elsewhere chapter instead. So these are trial sets here, and while you are doubling up on the Minor Slayer, the Major Slayer that you gain from Lokkestiiz more than outweighs doubling down on the Minor Slayer bonus. Now, you will notice I have the perfected versions here. There are non-perfect versions of this set. So instead of Relequen's Perfect Boots, it would be just Relequen's Boots. The imperfect version of these sets is usually obtained from just clearing the trial on normal. For Relequen specifically, the non-perfect version of this stuff comes from normal Cloudrest, all configurations, and then the side bosses on veteran Cloudrest, that's really how you would get them. So perfected version of Relequens comes from veteran Cloudrest, but the different pieces come from different configurations. So the weapons will come specifically from just plain old veteran clear, doesn't matter what configuration it is, you will have a chance of getting a weapon. It'll be guaranteed in +0 and in all of the configurations. For armor, you will need to complete Veteran Cloudrest on +1, +2, or +3 configurations. For jewelry pieces, you need to complete Veteran Cloudrest on the +2 or +3 configurations. The +3 configuration will give you gold jewelry, the +2 configuration will give you purple jewelry. So basically, in order to get Relequen's perfected sets, you will have to clear Cloudrest on the +1 configuration or higher on Veteran. Perfected Lokkestiiz, on the other hand, this just comes from straight Veteran Sunspire, so there's no need to do any of the hard modes here. Just clear it on Vet and you'll have a chance to get these Perfected Lokkestiiz drops. The chests in Veteran Sunspire, however, will only drop normal Lokkestiiz, so don't go into a Veteran Sunspire instance and expect to get perfected stuff from the chest that you will find in that trial. In terms of traits and enchants, again, pretty much exactly what you would expect from a dual wield build, so Divines with max stamina enchants, all medium armor pieces. And then jewelry is usually going to be either 3 bloodthirsty or 3 infused. You can combine them however you'd like as well. And then 3 weapon damage enchants. Bloodthirsty is going to be a little bit stronger than infused, but there is an argument to be said for infused in certain fights where execute damage is not going to be as important, and it's more important to get that upfront damage instead. So Cloudrest, for example, if you're running stamina in Cloudrest, that would be an example of where infused is going to be a little bit stronger or about equal to bloodthirsty. Now for weapons, you have 2 options. I have a battle axe here, but there is an argument to be said for the greatsword. The battle axe gives you a bleed. The greatsword increases your damage done modifier. Now I'm running precise here because I'm on a necromancer on this particular class. Necromancers have an additional pen bonus as their class passive, so we don't need to run sharpened. But usually you will be running sharpened as your trait here. The actual enchant you're going to be running, you won't be running an enchant, you'll be running double damage health poisons here, so exactly as you would expect from a dual wield build. The only difference is, of course, the trait, so it's usually either going to be sharpened if you're not running something like One Piece Krog or any other armor set that has a 1 physical penetration bonus, or precise if you do have an additional source of penetration like the Necromancer passive or another armor set. Now, the difference between Battle Axe and Greatsword is a little bit hard to describe, but essentially, the Greatsword is going to give you more consistent DPS, but the DPS ceiling is going to be a little bit lower. The Battle Axe gives you a higher DPS ceiling, but you are more reliant on the RNG of the bleed. So if the Battle Axe bleed itself is able to provide around 4% of your overall DPS, then the Battle Axe is going to do better than the sword. The sword, because of all the damage modifiers you have as a DPS, even though it does say 6% on the passive, it's actually closer to about 4% effective additional damage done. So that's where that 4% cutoff comes from if you decide to go ahead and do the math. So generally speaking, I would recommend sticking with the Battle Axe, but the Greatsword will pull similar DPS or consistent DPS, but your overall ceiling is going to be just a hair lower compared to the Battle Axe. Then for your back bar, you're still running a Master's or Maelstrom bow, depending on whether you want the single target or the AoE DPS. No matter what bow you're running though, you will be running infused with a weapon damage enchant. Now moving on to other sets, we're going to go over first any dungeon sets, then we'll cover Overland, and by that regard, crafted sets as well, then various trial sets, and we'll also cover monster helms as well. Starting off first with dungeon sets. So there are a few dungeon sets that are potentially good on a two-handed build. A lot of them are very similar to what you would expect to see in a dual-wield build. So for example, Leviathan, which comes from Grip of Hearts, very powerful. It's a static bonus, so you are going to want to wear this on the body. You don't want to necessarily run this as a weapon set because you will lose the crit when you are on your back bar. Moving on from there, you also have, find it here somewhere. Here it is. You have Tsogvin's Warband, which comes from Frostbolt, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to farm for this set here. The advantage of Tsogvin's is you're getting some additional crit from the 5-piece. You don't really have to worry so much about getting Barb Trap uptime because you're getting the Minor Force from Tsogvin's, but the 4-piece also adds additional physical penetration. So remember when I said that you would be able to run precise if you have physical penetration bonus? This is where Tsogvin's would come into play. So if you're running something like Relequen and Tsogvin's, then you would be able to run precise as your front bar trait. You won't necessarily have to run sharpened anymore. You can still run sharpened, but it's not necessary any longer here. Sogwins is definitely a very powerful tool here. It's a very powerful set, and it is something that you will see usually two-handed builds run in trash fights in place of Relequen. So you would run something like Lokkestiiz and Sogwins rather than Relequen and Sogwins for AoE fights here. Then from there, I also want to point out Azure Blight Reaper, which is gotten quite a bit of a nerf going into Dragonhold, but it's still potentially pretty decent here. And not quite as strong in terms of set bonuses, because the 4-piece just adds stamina regen, which is not really directly beneficial to overall DPS. The 5-piece can be useful in trash fights because you will be able to build up those stacks very quickly, especially if you have a bunch of dots going at once. So for example, Poison Injection, you have Endless Hail or Arrow Barrage going, and you have any other sort of class dots you might have going on here. It is possible to get these up very quickly and then get the additional splash damage, but it's not quite as strong as it used to be just due to the fact that only one of them can be active at one time in a given group. So not many medium armor sets here, but again, that is Leviathan from Crypt of Hearts, and Sogwins from Frostvault, and Azure Blight Reaper from Lair of Maarselok. Now for Overland sets, as well as some crafted sets. There are a few Overland sets, not many, but there are a few. So we have Spriggan's Thorns, which is most useful in trash fights for the additional physical penetration that it provides. So if you don't have an AoE source of major fracture through something like a Stamina Wardens, Subterranean Assault, or through Unnerving Boneyard from a Necromancer, then you're going to want to run Spriggan's Thorns to get the additional penetration on everything. So really great for trash fights, but I wouldn't recommend running this for single target fights. From there, other set here, Briarheart, which is from Hrothgar. So if you don't have access to the Hrothgar zone, you can just buy this off of Guild Traders here. So when you deal the critical damage, you have a chance to increase your weapon damage for 10 seconds, and while the effect is active, you also get a heal whenever you do a critical hit as well. Now, Briarheart, because it's a proc set, you can wear this on the front bar, and it'll carry over to your back bar. So that's one of the advantages of running Briarheart here. The fact that if you do happen to proc it on the front bar, you're able to carry over to the back bar here. So it is useful as a front bar set if you don't have any other sets currently to run on your front bar. For example, something like Lokkestiiz or something. And then I also want to mention Dragonguard Elite here, which is situationally useful. In terms of overall crit chance it provides, it's not going to be as strong as Berserking Warrior, which we'll be going over in a few minutes here, just because of that 4-piece stamina regen bonus, which you can remember from Azure Blight Reaper, doesn't directly provide any additional DPS. So if you're already able to sustain a light attack rotation without Dragonguard Elite or Azure Blight Reaper, this armor bonus is basically useless for you. Dragonguard Elite is potentially nice because it does give you a lot of crit chance. Now, obviously, the downside is you have to be able to flank it, so it has to be either from the sides or the front. And for a lot of boss configurations, you won't be in front of the boss. At most, you'll be at the side of the boss. So it is going to be situationally useful. There are a couple of fights where you will be facing the boss, for example, Sunspire, when you're facing off against the dragons, but those instances are really far and few between, so I usually don't recommend farming for Dragonguard Elite here. It is a Overland set though, so it is easy to farm for it if you decide you want to run this set or have it in your back pocket in case it becomes useful for whatever strategies that you might be running. Now, in terms of craftable sets, since we are going over Overland sets here, there are a handful of them that are really useful. So these are really great for people who are just starting to get into DPSing. For people who need to get a set that'll tide them over while they're farming for Relequens, Lokkestiiz, and other sort of dungeon or trial sets. The first set here, going down by alphabetical order, is going to be, actually, Hunding's Rage. So this is a base game crafted set which requires you to know 6 traits in whatever piece you want to craft. Now, like all crafting sets, you don't necessarily have to craft this yourself. Because it's crafted, you can trade this with other people. And you can also commission somebody else to craft this for you and then trade it to you, for example. So don't feel like you have to get 6 research traits done on every single piece of armor in order to craft Hunding's Rage. You can just commission someone or you can buy it. But this just adds raw weapon damage, so very consistent. Not necessarily going to be the strongest set for you to run, but it's a very consistent set, and it's an easy to obtain set as well. So definitely something that'll be able to tide you over while you're trying to get your trial sets. Along the same lines, you also have Mechanical Acuity, which is another 6 trait set, this time from the Clockwork City zone. So again, you can either craft it yourself, commission somebody to craft it for you, or just buy it straight up from guild traders. This armor set bonus wise has a few weaknesses because it provides only spell damage on the third armor piece, which is not particularly useful, and then max magicka on the fourth piece, which might be beneficial depending on kind of your build, but generally speaking not overly useful. Max stamina as well is not as strong on stamina DPS compared to like max magicka on magicka DPS. But the 5-piece basically gives you a chance to have 100% crit chance for 5 seconds every 18 seconds when you deal direct damage, which can be very powerful for burst fights. So it is an easy to obtain set. Overall sustained DPS, not going to be quite as strong as Berserking Warrior or Lokkestiiz, but for a crafted set, it is fairly strong, so I would recommend potentially picking up a set of Mechanical Acuity. And then the final set I want to talk about here, which is actually not on this list because this is an older version of Craft Store, is going to be, if I can find it, I might not have it here. No, I don't have it here, so let me really quickly pop over to the banker so I can pull up the actual stats for you. But it's going to be a new crafted set from the Southern Elsewhere, and that's going to be, find it, is New Moon Acolyte. So this is a 9 trait crafted set, so you have to be a master crafter in order to craft this set yourself, but it is pretty much the quintessential hybrid set, essentially. It gives you weapon crit, weapon damage, physical penetration, and then the magic versions of those, so spell damage, spell crit, and spell penetration, and then the 5-piece adds a bunch of weapon and spell damage. The downside is the increase in the cost of your active abilities. So this does running this set basically results in a drop in your sustain, which could be killer for your specific build depending on your class and your overall rotation fluency. For quick fights, trash fights perhaps, potentially useful because you don't need to necessarily worry about running out of stamina. You'll be able to regenerate that between trash fights or between trash fights and the boss fight. But for single target longer fights, not really something I would necessarily recommend just because the actual increase in cost, a 5% increase in cost might seem small, but it does make a big difference in protracted fights. So not really something I would usually recommend running in trials. And then finally, we have trial sets. So there are a handful of trial sets here. Some of them are situationally useful, other of them are generically useful. So you have a heavy armor set that is called Berserking Warrior, which can be obtained from Citadel. So because it's a heavy armor set, you will need to have access to jewelry crafting and transmutation, because you will need to transmute the jewelry. The jewelry comes only in healthy, which obviously does not improve your DPS, so you will want to transmute those to either infused or bloodthirsty, the two traits we talked about earlier. So you will want to get the jewelry and then the weapons. And you will need to get this from Citadel. So it is a base game set, but you will need to have access to expansions and DLCs in order to actually be able to make the most use out of this set itself. Now, in terms of medium trial armor sets, there are a few. We've already talked about Lokkestiiz and Relequen and their perfected counterparts. Next, we have Vicious Serpent, which is the only source of minor slayer for stamina DPS in the base game. This comes from any of the 3 Craglorn trials. It is fairly stat dense, so you have 3 armor bonuses here. So you're not necessarily losing a armor bonus, you're actually gaining and 1 additional, essentially 2 additional armor bonuses if you count minor slayer as an armor bonus. The 5-piece reduces the cost of your stamina abilities by 8%, so a static bonus, so you want to have this on the body if you can help it. And it does help out your overall sustain. So if you want to pair this with something like New Moon Acolyte while you're farming for Relequen and Lokkestiiz, that's actually not a bad combination. Of course, the downside is both of them are static sets, so you'll be losing one of these effects on your back bar. But combine this with New Moon Acolyte, and it's actually a pretty decent set. Again, it's the only source of Minor Slayer for base game users only, so this is a set that you're going to want to get if you do fall under that demographic. Next, we have War Machine, which is useful for classes with low-cost ultimates. So that would be Nightblades, Templars, and Wardens. So for those 3 classes, their ultimate costs are between 70 and 75 ultimate, depending on the class. And so War Machine pairs very nicely with those classes. So whenever you use an ultimate, you and the closest 2 allies within 28 meters gain Major Slayer for 10 seconds. Now, obviously, Lokkestiiz is better for Major Slayer uptime in organized raid groups. But there are some instances where perhaps running War Machine might end up being more beneficial. So for example, on a Nightblade, if you're already running Incapacitating Strike as your ultimate of choice, you might as well run War Machine if, some of your stamina DPS don't have their Lokkestiiz farmed up yet. At the very least, you might be able to provide some additional Major Slayer uptime for them. And moving on, we have Twice-Fanged Serpent, or also known as Twice-Fanged Snake. This comes from Sanctum Ophidia, so it is a base game set here, and this pretty much falls in the same niche as Spriggan's Thorns. So in instances where you don't have AoE Major Fracture, run Twice-Fanged Serpent to get that additional physical penetration for trash fights. Not really recommended for single target fights because you will be able to get the penetration elsewhere. Well, that's pretty much all the sets. You will find them all in the description below, as well as whether to wear them on the body or the front bar, and where you can obtain the different sets. Moving on to our character sheet here. In terms of race, I am a Dark Elf here, but you can also go with Orc. Both of these races have 258 additional weapon damage. So those are the only two races with additional weapon damage. Orcs get 2,000 max stamina and 1,000 max health, so they have a little bit of survivability and pretty much top of the line stamina sustain. Dark Elves only get 1875 max stamina, but they make up for that loss by also having 258 additional spell damage and 1875 max magicka. So if you want to swap back and forth between a magicka and stamina DPS, Dark Elves are a good option there. Then you have what I like to call the sustain races, so those would be the Red Guards, the Bosmer, the Wood Elves, and the Imperials if you have access to the Imperial Edition. So all three of these guys get 2,000 max stamina, but each of them have different ways to basically improve their sustain. The Red Guards, for example, get additional stamina back whenever they deal damage. Bosmer get just flat 258 additional stamina regen, and then Imperials get 333 stamina back whenever they deal damage, along with health and magicka. Plus you get 3% cost reduction to all abilities. So they're giving up that weapon damage in exchange for greater sustain, which might be a viable trade-off depending on, how you want to build yourself. So if you want to pair, for example, New Moon Acolyte with any of those three races, you'll have better luck that way because those three races have some additional sustain tools to kind of offset that cost increase from New Moon's Acolyte. Then you have Khajiits, which kind of fall into this Jack of all trades, Master of none race. So they get pretty even stat increases across the board. So 825 magicka health and stamina, 85 stamina regen, 85 magicka regen, 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical damage done and critical healing done. So again, kind of a jack of all trades race. If you want to flex between tanking, healing, magicka DPS, Khajiits might be a good option for you. In terms of attributes, all of our points are going into stamina here. You can put a few points into health if you want to improve your overall survivability, but that's kind of up to you if you want to run that. If you're running buy-stat food, you won't need to put any points into health because you will have plenty of health from the buy-stat food. But if you're running sustained food like Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Comorn Throne, you might need to put a few points into health to get up to a comfortable health threshold. But in order to maximize your DPS, you will want to put all points into stamina. For Mundus Stone, we're going with the Shadow, still the strongest Mundus Stone in the game. Then if you want the additional sustain, you can be a vampire if you'd like. So when you're stage 2 or below, you get 10% initial stamina and magical regen, which can be beneficial for help your sustain if you need the sustain bonus. At stage 3 and below, you also get some additional damage mitigation when you're below a certain percentage of health, but that's generally not really worth it because you will also end up taking more damage from fire damage. Plus, you also get a drop on your health regen. So those trade-offs are kind of what you're gonna have to go for here. If you want additional regen, you can certainly go for stage 2 vampirism, but usually you will not dip below stage 2 because you're really just going for the additional regen as a vampire, not necessarily for the additional damage reduction from the stage 3 passive. Now for food, I am running Lavafoot here because that is just parse food. That's what I run for parses. But for actual food that you will be running either sustain food or buy-stat food. So you will either be running Artaeum Takeaway Broth. This is if you need to sustain. So you get lower max health and lower max stamina by using Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Comorn Throne, which is the other option. But you do get some additional stamina regen and health regen by using Artaeum Takeaway Broth. The other option would be, if I can find it here, would be to run buy-stat food, which is just max health and max stamina. All of these recipes for buy-stat food are in the base game, so you don't necessarily need to buy it off of guild traders or anything. You might need to get the recipe, but these are fairly easy to obtain here. You'll notice that we don't get any additional stamina regen, so if you don't have good stamina regen, you should not be running bi-stat food here if you can't sustain your rotation. Now finally, CPs. Now for some classes you will need to shift CP points around just because you might have different penetration values. So for example, as a stamina necromancer, I have an additional 1500 physical penetration. So my piercing CP is going to be different compared to the other 5 classes. But I'll show you guys what your CPs should look like in general. So under piercing, you should have around 35 to 36 piercing, depending on how well things kind of play out. For mighty, you're going to want 64 points into mighty. For precise strikes, you can go to 56 to 66, depending on, again, the specific class. Thaumaturge, depending on your class, usually somewhere around something like 50, anywhere between 48 to 56, and I've even had the math say as low as 40 to 44. So a lot of flexibility here with Thaumaturge. And then Master at Arms is going to be, again, very similar to Precise Strikes, between 56 and 66. So I can drop this down to 61, for example, and I can bump up Precise Strikes up to 61 as well. So that would be able to hit my jump points here. Now obviously as a Necromancer I would have lower CP put into Piercing, but that'll be reserved for the actual Necromancer build video. So this is the general CP that should work across the board for most classes. So 64 Mighty, 36 Piercing, 61 Precise Strikes, 48 Thaumaturge, and 61 Master at Arms. Your other red and green CPs are pretty much exactly what you would expect to see. So red CPs, 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, 64 Hardy, and Elemental Defender for that balanced approach to mitigation. And then green CPs, 100, not Arcanist, 100 into Mooncalf. And then the remainder can be placed wherever you'd like. So 75 Tenacity, you always want a few points to Tenacity in case you do have the heavy attack. 49 is a pretty good sort of compromise if you want some more green CPs to put across different nodes here. Then I have, for example, 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. So again, the most important is to get 100 into Mooncalf, and from there you can kind of split up nodes however you'd like. So that pretty much covers it for this video. So again, this covers all the gear, which you can find in the description below, CPs, and other sort of character stuff. Also, you can find that below as well. For specific class rotations and skills, you will want to refer to the class-specific videos. Links to those are going to be down in the description as they are released. So I will be releasing them every other day, starting from today. So in 2 days from today, you will see the first two-handed build video, which should be the Stamina Necromancer. If you guys have any questions about two-handed builds, how they stack up to dual-wield builds, kind of where they kind of stand in terms of your overall endgame DPS meta, feel free to ask questions in the comment section below. I will answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.